Heading into week 3 of Denver Broncos OTAs, the inside linebacker position is the one area we have the most questions about heading into the offseason. We'll tell you why on today's episode, Locked On Broncos.
You are Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Broncos Country, what's happening? Welcome into another episode of Locked On Broncos, your daily Denver Broncos podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you so much once again to all the everydayers out there in Broncos Country. Thanks so much for tuning in and making us your first listen of the day. Every single day, all year long, we have you covered, bringing you the best Broncos news, content, coverage, analysis, and more. I'm Cody Roark, Broncos reporter for Mile High Sports. I cover the team in person daily in Dove Valley. Been covering the team for over 7.5 years now. Joined alongside by Sayre Bedinger, site expert of their predominantlyorange.com. Has been covering the Broncos for a long time as well. Today's episode of the show is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. And right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. Visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started today. And really, Broncos Country, it's a big week. Week 3 of OTAs is here. There's a lot that's going on, and then it's going to set the table for mandatory minicamp next week. So what we're going to talk about on today's show, what is kind of a mailbag series. We got questions about what is the fiercest position battle heading into training camp, which wide receivers are leading the way at OTAs. But we're going to kick things off by talking about the Broncos inside linebacker position. That role, the starting job next to Alex Singleton, is the biggest question right now after observing a few weeks of OTAs going into week 3 here. And Sayre, really to kind of set the table, the Broncos are kind of in a position right now that I felt like that they were in maybe 2-3 years ago, really trying to figure out who's going to be the starter next to Josey Jewell. Well, now Josey's in Carolina. Now the question is, who is going to be the starter next to Alex Singleton? The Broncos are working with a multitude of different players right here to see who that's going to be. And from my observation, which we'll dive into here, I feel like this is definitely probably the one position group that needs to step up, that has the biggest question, not necessarily based on performance or what we've seen at OTAs, but more so like this is going to be crucial if the Broncos are going to have success in 2024.
And it is a situation that's very reminiscent of just a couple of years ago, right? Because remember, in the 2022 offseason is when the Broncos signed Alex Singleton as a free agent. And the year before that, I think Josey Jewell missed all but the first game and then changed. I think he got injured in week 2 against the New York Giants. Yeah, torn pectoral. So he missed most of the season. So you went into that 2022 offseason thinking like, well, we hope Josey is back to full strength, and he was playing well in the 1.5 games we saw from him. But now here we are, fast forward. I mean, Alex Singleton is playing at a very high level. So you have a little bit of, I guess, a bonus there as compared to a couple of seasons ago when Josey was coming off injury, with Alex playing well right now. But the question, I guess, opposite him is pretty much the same as it was a couple of years ago, where, I mean, nobody was considering Alex Singleton to be a legitimate, I guess I can't say nobody. There was at least one guy in the comments here on Locked On Broncos who was banging the Alex Singleton drum all that offseason. But most people were like, hey, Singleton, he signed for less than a 6th round pick, right? I mean, he's not going to factor on anything but special teams. Eagles fans were like, oh, you guys signed Alex Singleton, not jokes on you guys. Well, he became a 3-year contract, or, he got a new contract from Denver after the way that he played coming in for the injured Jonas Griffith that year. So I guess you just never know who's going to step up is the moral of the story. But really, you need someone to step up, because the Broncos were kind of fortunate that Alex Singleton did that in 2022 when he played as well as he did with Jonas Griffith, the expected starter, next to Josey Jewell. And so it wasn't a case of like, well, we know that it's going to be these two guys. It's very similar. It was very similar to what this year is, where it's, I don't know, Jonas coming off injury, Cody Barton, he kind of was in the same boat as Alex Singleton, where Commanders fans and Seahawks fans are like, I can't believe somebody signed this dude, So you're kind of hoping that one of these guys can step up. But right now, that's kind of all you have is hope.
So here's what I've seen at OTAs, and I think this is going to be a very interesting position battle that's going to play itself out. I mean, naturally through training camp, and I think through the NFL preseason. But alongside Alex Singleton, obviously he's the starter, right? But they've been mixing in Jonas Griffith, they've been mixing in Cody Barton and Justin Sternad. Those have been the 3 players that have been getting reps alongside Alex Singleton in various team drills, right? They want to just mix and match. And so, I mean, right now, as Sean Payton told us, don't read too much into who's with who right now. We're just trying to get guys reps. And I think when you look at the positions that have the most depth or the most like ability open right now in terms of a competition, running back, wide receiver, cornerback, linebacker, like these are the positions we can look and say, wow, like, okay, this guy's getting work here. It's because they have a lot of dudes that they're trying to figure out, hey, how can we get a larger sample size here to factor into who plays well with each other? How do you develop chemistry with one another at that position? And I think so much for a guy like Alex, who really has told us, like working with Josie, he's like, Josie and I could look at each other, give each other like a certain look, or even like make a finger gesture, and we knew exactly how to play off one another. I knew exactly what he was going to do, and it allowed me to fill in and maybe step up in an area where maybe, most guys have to communicate it pre-snap. They didn't have to have that because they worked so well in tandem together. I will say this, Jonas Griffith is an interesting guy, obviously, because you look at him, I think he's the tallest linebacker that the Broncos do have. He's physically gifted, super athletic. And for him, he's coming off 2 years where he's had a season-ending injury. But I think a lot of people forget, before Alex Singleton emerged as the starter, Jonas Griffith, as you mentioned, was the starter, started 8 or 9 games for Denver in 2022. And then he had the foot injury. And all of a sudden, we're like, wow, okay, he's gone. Okay, Alex Singleton steps in and still finds a way to lead the team in tackles for the Broncos that season. So there is a lot of moving pieces right here, I think, with the inside linebacker position. To me, definitely the one area I'm definitely curious to see, how does this play out in training camp? How does this play out in the preseason? But those are the 3 names I think Broncos fans absolutely have to pay attention to in terms of getting reps. There's undrafted, rookie linebacker out of Fresno State, Lavelle Bailey. From what I have seen, not getting reps alongside Alex Singleton. So I don't think he's going to factor into the starting job. I think he's going to factor into depth to be able to contribute on the roster, play special teams. But right now, you got Cody Barton, you got Jonas Griffith, and Justin Sternad. And, while I think a lot of people look at those 3 names like, doesn't inspire a lot of confidence, we've also been in this position before, Sayre, where you and I were like, I don't know if this room is good enough yet. And then Alex Singleton came out of nowhere and surprised all of us alongside Josie. So the Broncos believe that they have those guys inside that locker room, inside that position room that can do the same thing. And so I think inside linebacker, definitely a great question. And this question was sent in to us in terms of one of our listeners on social media. So we wanted to address it here in this mailbag episode of the show here. But other people want to know which Denver Broncos wide receivers are leading the way at OTAs. 2 veterans are leading the way and running with it in big-time fashion. We'll tell you about why Tim Patrick and Josh Reynolds are standing out in Broncos OTAs and what they can continue to do to build on that room going forward here on today's brand new episode, Locked on Broncos. Today's episode, Locked on Broncos, is brought to you by our friends over there at the Game Time app. And look, folks, the NBA Finals are here. It's an exciting matchup between the Boston Celtics, the Dallas Mavericks. And if you're in those markets and you want to go to an NBA Finals game, it's easier now with the Game Time app, because Game Time makes getting NBA Finals tickets even faster and easier. And prices on the Game Time app, they actually go down the closer it gets to tip-off. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their lowest price guarantee, Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying NBA tickets. Not only the NBA Finals, but your favorite NFL games this upcoming season. If you're in the Seattle area, you want to see the Broncos Week 1 game because Broncos Country travels well. You can also get Broncos tickets to the Seahawks game Week 1 inside the Game Time app, and you get to see all-in pricing where when you toggle this feature, it shows you your total up front, so you're not left with any surprise fees when you check out. They get seat views where you get a panoramic view from your seat inside the app before you buy, so you have the best vantage point of all the action, whether that's on the hardwood or at an NFL stadium. Take the guesswork out of buying NBA Finals tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account, redeem code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed.
Sean Payton and the Denver Broncos are excited about the wide receiver room in 2024, but why? Who's been standing out at OTAs? We're going to break it all down on today's episode, Locked on Broncos, but want to say thank you so much to every single one of you that makes this show your first listen of the day, every single day, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And hey, are you sick of national media coverage not covering your favorite teams? I mean, I know that's happened for me, where you want to hear what's going on with your favorite team, but you turn on ESPN and whatnot, it's not on there. Well, guess what? Locked On Sports Today is a free 24/7 sports streaming channel that's programmed for you every day to bring you the biggest stories that you're looking for, the stories that you want. And it's going to bring you can't miss analysis, opinions, news, and it's streaming 24/7 on YouTube or the free Amazon Fire TV channels app, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Cody, let's talk about this wide receiver position, because Sean Payton had talked about how he's very, very excited about this group. I mean, he was talking about Marvin Mims, and he was kind of talking about how things went last year. And then he kind of started to talk about just the youth overall and how he's really excited. I think really what we're talking about here is the excitement over veterans on this team, which is, I guess kind of almost two newcomers in a sense. I mean, everybody knows Tim Patrick. Nobody on the Broncos fandom really knows much about Josh Reynolds, as opposed to what they've seen in highlights from the Detroit Lions and things like that. So these two guys coming together, the new look Tim Patrick, number 12 out there, Josh Reynolds running around out there as another veteran in that group. What have you seen from these guys, and why do you think the team is excited about what they've been bringing to the table?
Well, I think first and foremost, acknowledging where Tim Patrick is at in his recovery from the Achilles surgery that he had last year. I mean, he's not even a year removed from that injury happening here, Sayre. But the one thing I'd say about Tim that I'm watching, because he's not like so far from what we've seen in OTAs, like in the open practices available to us in the media, we have not seen him participate in team drills. And I think that is definitely something that you hear about and you're like, okay, like, why isn't he doing anything in team drills? Is he doing any team drills on the Tuesday and Wednesday practices as opposed to Thursday? Not sure. But he is participating in individual drills. He has been consistently participating in the quarterback receiver routes on air drills. And I think to be honest with you, that's all we need to see Tim Patrick doing right now. He's involved heavily in the individual drills alongside Kiri Colbert. He's leading the way there. He's also helping the young guys get acclimated. That's a deep room right now in terms of the number of bodies they have at that position, which we will dive into a little bit deeper here in just a moment. But you got Tim doing that, and he looks good. Like I shared a clip on my social media on Twitter and also on Threads about him running a route, and it's just like he's planting, he's cutting, he's running full speed, and he's doing things that he was doing pre-injury, right? And that's great. You want to see that. Obviously, it's against air. We'll put the disclaimer on that. It's against air. There's no coverage. There's no defenders out there, but it's just a confidence thing. And you want to see him get back to doing that, because I guarantee you the narrative around Tim Patrick, if he was out there during OTAs and it was being captured, he was running around, if he was struggling or looked timid while running routes and wasn't looking as explosive, I guarantee you people would be talking about it, and they'd be saying like, well, obviously Tim's not going to be on this roster. I've seen on social media, and I don't know where this is coming from, sir, but I've seen people talk about, well, Tim's on the roster bubble. I don't think he is in any way, shape, or form. And look, even Sean had said it as well. I asked Sean a couple of weeks ago during the first week of OTAs how Tim has looked, and he said Tim is leading that room. Sean has a lot of love and a lot of, like, I think, intention with what Tim is going to bring to the table, even if it's not as the receiver who gets the most in terms of his role, right? He may not see the most looks or targets, but I guarantee you the minutes and the snaps that Tim plays will be meaningful. And obviously he's going to have to stay healthy. And I think that's one thing we'll obviously acknowledge here. Tim has had 2 back-to-back season-ending injuries. It's been frustrating, right? But I hate this narrative that gets now attached to Tim. Well, Tim's just made of glass. Tim is going to tear his ACL by week 3. I've seen people comment. It drives me nuts that the narrative about players who just deal with serious injuries. Like, I don't know if people have put in the time and the research here, but obviously a lot of the instances where, let's say you have one major injury, right? Tim had the ACL. Sometimes there's a percentage look where you suffer another major injury, right? Which happened to be the Achilles, because sometimes during your recovery, you may overcompensate. You may be trying to favor one leg more so than the other. And it's all about like a balance in terms of how you use your muscles, proper deceleration. Bo Lowry's coming. He's done a really good job working with Tim. And I guarantee you, Tim right now, he's excited about this season. He's in a good position. And in terms of Josh Reynolds here, I'm going to touch on this. He has been Mr. Reliable. I'd say in terms of, you look at a guy who's consistent day to day, who's made catches in every practice we've been able to attend. This is a guy who is catching everything. Hasn't had a moment yet where he's had a drop pass or has had any kind of play where maybe he didn't run the wrong route in terms of what we were able to see, but he's getting the ball thrown to him. He's making catches. He's making big plays downfield. He's making it in the middle of the field. He's making it in the short to intermediate, and he's catching everything. That, to me, I think is a great start of where you want to be, and he's finding that type of rhythm with guys like Bo Nix and Jarrett Stidham primarily. That is what I like to see here, and these are the 2 guys from what I've seen, Sayre, who are leading the way at OTAs. And obviously this question is something that came in from our friend Carson on Twitter, but there's also been some other standouts at the wide receiver position as well. We'll dive into them in a minute. But, really, I want to get your thoughts on kind of what I've mentioned about Tim and Josh Reynolds. Like, everyone's waiting for Courtland Sutton to return, and that's obviously going to happen at some point. But I think from what I've seen, Sayre, with Tim and with Josh, if that is for some reason the two guys who are going to be leading that room coming into the season, I'm oddly enough comfortable with it.
Here's something that I'm reminded of as you're talking about those two guys. Remember what John Elway once said about, we want players who want to be Broncos. And I feel like Tim Patrick is the embodiment of that, and I know John Elway's not the GM anymore, although I think there's still some people out there who may think that, which he's not. People, John Elway's not the general manager of the Broncos anymore, but that line rings so true to me in terms of Tim Patrick, because what did he do after missing the first 2 years of his brand new contract and the Broncos paying him all this money? He comes back on a reduced deal. He took a pay cut. He's done other things over the last 2 years to help with the salary cap because he can't play. And he's been the guy on the sideline. You watch any highlight of the Broncos. I know they haven't scored a ton the last couple of years. You watch any highlight, you're going to see Tim Patrick, the first guy down the sideline, dapping up his teammates, and he's always there. And I guarantee you that means more to Sean Payton and this coaching staff than people who kind of put those lists together, people like me, and I've not included Tim on a list like that, but we put these lists together every year, and there's so much more that he brings to the table. I mean, he's a great blocker. He's got strong hands. He's a great leader. He wants to be there. And the Broncos, frankly, don't have a ton of veteran leadership on this team. So to me, you got younger all offseason. That was the goal. You cut Russell Wilson. You cut Justin Simmons. You did all these things to get younger. Tim is one of the only veteran guys to be you need to have mentors for your young guys in the locker room. And you need to have people like that Bo Nix can lean on and rely on. And I know even if Tim's not playing, like, that's somebody who's going to be a huge resource for any young player on this roster, especially guys that get hurt, especially guys who are undrafted and working their way up the roster. Tim Patrick, to me, is uncuttable at this point in the season.
Well, and if Broncos fans want to know just how impactful Tim is, go to find Marvin Mims' press conference from the other day. I asked Marvin the question about Tim's role behind the scenes, what he's been able to gather from him, how helpful he's been. Even last year when he was dealing with the injury, he'll give you a great insight and great answer into that. If I'm not mistaken, and this is just off the top of my head, if I'm not mistaken, I think Tim Patrick and Courtland Sutton are the only Broncos who have been on the roster since 2018. I don't think there's any more players. I mean, it sounds legit. I'll have to double check that, but I was just thinking about that as you were. Oh, yeah, and Garrett Bowles. Yeah, Garrett Bowles. So, yeah, really those three guys have been the mainstays on this roster. Wow, there's been a lot of turnover here in Denver. In terms of talking about maybe some other standouts real quick, in terms of wide receivers at OTAs, there's so many guys at that position getting reps, getting opportunities. And this is also what I wanted to highlight, where Sean Payton said, like, hey, don't pay too much attention right now as to who's getting reps. We're just getting guys reps. Jalen Virgil has stood out. He had a really good practice last Thursday in terms of what we were able to watch. Caught several passes from Bo Nix. He caught passes from, obviously, Jarrett Stidham, Zach Wilson. He's been getting involved there. David Sills has kind of been like this under-the-radar guy that has been making catches, been making plays. And then, obviously, Michael Bandy, I think, had a big catch from Bo Nix during Thursday's practice in a move the ball third down period in terms of team. I think it was like a 20-yard gain that he had there. So I have to highlight that. And then little Jordan Humphrey's actually been a little consistent, especially with Bo Nix, with Jarrett Stidham, and also getting reps with Zach Wilson. So it's like, while we're focusing so much on Tim Patrick, Josh Reynolds, you're hoping Courtland's going to return. Marvin Mims obviously talked about quite a bit. And then obviously Troy Franklin, Devon Vele, there's been some hype and some conversation around them. These are some other receivers who've been making plays so far during OTA. So I definitely think we should mention that, bring that up as some guys who are also standing out. We'll continue to see where they're at here as week 3 of OTAs is here for Broncos Country. We'll have you covered every step of the way when we attend practice on Thursday. We'll recap that as well. But what is the fiercest position battle before camp? There's several positions that have a lot of competition involved. I'll tell you why I think it's the cornerback position here on today's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos. Today's episode of Locked On Broncos is brought to you by our friends over there at FanDuel Sportsbook. And as you all know it, FanDuel is America's number one sportsbook. And right now, it's winner take all time in the NBA and the NHL. And FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Because right now, new customers, they get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. So you sign up as a brand new customer here today. You go place a $5 bet on a money line of one of your favorite sporting events, and that bet wins, you're automatically going to be given $150 to bet on spreads, money lines, player props, and more from all your favorite sports, whether that's golf, the NBA, the NHL, the MLB. You can visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. Once again, that's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel is America's number one sportsbook. As we jump to the fourth quarter action on today's episode, Locked On Broncos, our mailbag episode, we're going to get to our question from Ed where he asks, which is the fiercest position battle before training camp? Before we get to Ed's question, just want to say thank you so much once again to everybody in Broncos country, all the everydayers out there for tuning in and making us your first listen. Just a reminder, you can get us for free every day on YouTube or wherever you get your podcasts. You can get involved in the show by getting involved in the comment section on YouTube. You can take us with you if you're on the go. I know I've been camping a little bit this month, so I take my favorite podcast on the road with me. So if you're on the road and Locked On Broncos is one of your favorite podcasts, take it with you as you go on your road trip. But we have an episode for you every single day, all year long. So if you listen to us Mondays and Tuesdays, make sure you start listening to us Mondays, Tuesdays, Wednesdays, Thursdays, Fridays. Fresh, objective Broncos coverage, fresh for you in Broncos country. All right, Sarah, as we get into our question here from Ed Holinsky, avid listener, watcher of the show, always sends in some great mailbag questions. We appreciate Ed and everybody else in Broncos country who chooses to do so. Ed asks me the question, and he kind of asks you this as well. I'm very curious for your thoughts. I'll let you start it off. He asked, what will be the fiercest training camp position battle and why? And look, we're not at training camp yet. We're about a month and a half away. But OTAs is the start of this position battle, whatever it may be. It's beginning now. The overall sample size, the evaluation. I know where I'm going with this. I want to know where you're going with this in terms of what is the one position that you feel like will be the fiercest competition right now through training camp?
Well, I think there's a number of them, really. Let's go with an underrated one, though. The tight end position, to me, Cody, is one. I was gonna make a joke about the punter position. Nobody really cares about it. No, I'm just joking. I'm joking. That'll be a great one. But no, I think tight end is interesting because, like, there's this. I think there's a perceived pecking order at this point. I mean, we've talked about kind of the potential that Lucas Kroll could be breaking out this year, and certainly Sean Payton has done his part to rev up the engines on that hype train or whatever you want to call it. And so I think tight end is interesting because you've got a veteran, Adam Troutman, who just signed a brand new 2-year contract to come back to the Broncos. You've got Greg Dulcich, who, according to our friend 9 News insider Mike Kliss, he's close to coming back and returning to the practice field. And now you've got Lucas Kroll, who is this wild card among wild cards, the potential diamond in the rough, if you will, from relative obscurity and anonymity last year to potentially being the starting tight end this year. So I think you've got 3 guys at tight end right now that kind of present you with an interesting option in terms of, could this guy start? Could he lead the team in targets at the tight end position? How many snaps is he going to play? Are the Broncos going to manufacture touches for this guy? I know that I don't think Troutman has quite as high of a ceiling, but I also don't think he's just going to go into the abyss. Like it kind of seems like people think that's going to happen with Lucas Kroll having a breakout year or Greg Dulcich coming back from injury. Like, I don't think Troutman is just going to go down easily in this competition. He has the most experience of any of these guys in Sean Payton's offense. So I kind of like the tight end position as one of those fierce battles in camp because Troutman was the starter last year. Dulcich was supposed to be the joker last year. Now Lucas Kroll is in the mix. I think that group right there, there's no clear pecking order to me, and it could be any combination. It could be Dulcich, Troutman, Kroll. It could be Kroll, Dulcich, Troutman. It could be, think of any combination of those 3 that you can. I think that's going to be one to watch.
Well, and I was surprised as well. I mean, this was something that I don't think any of us knew until this weekend when Mike had posted the report here. We had thought it was just the Broncos doing long-term maintenance on Dulcich for the hamstring. But I do remember when Dulcich was trying to come back in the last couple of weeks last year, had the foot injury that popped up. Well, apparently he had surgery in the offseason, and they're just being, very cautious with it, monitoring. So this isn't a hamstring related issue. This is relative to the foot issue that popped up when he was trying to come back. He's close. We could potentially see him back on the field this week, which would be a welcome sight. But in terms of what I've seen at OTA so far, I mean, it really has been Kroll and Troutman leading the way at that position. And, Nate Adkins had a couple of nice plays during Thursday's practice. But to be honest with you, Sayre, I mean, the beef and the meat of this tight end room in terms of relative strength and overall value is going to come from Kroll with his excitement and his upside, Troutman with his experience. And if Greg Dulcich can come back and stay healthy, you have an explosive guy where I think that could be your three-man tight end room. Denver could include just three guys at that position because of all the skill guys that they do have right now. So I'm very curious as well to see how that position room plays out. I'm going to go with the cornerback position here. I think it is going to be the toughest and most fiercest competition going into camp. And look, I think so much of the conversation before we were able to see OTAs here, you and I were talking about, okay, is it going to be Damari? Is it going to be Riley Moss? Is it going to be Levi Wallace? Well, the reality of the situation, I mean, it could be those guys, but right now it looks like it could be Jaquan McMillan, who's been making plays at OTAs through the past couple of weeks. And watching him, as we talked about positional versatility, obviously getting reps inside in the nickel, but then has been moving to the outside, has been making plays on the outside against bigger guys like Lucas Kroll, has been smart, been consistent, communicates well, can play press man coverage, can play off-ball coverage, has shown all that. At OTAs, he's suddenly emerged as this guy that I'm starting to think now, Sayre, all right, like if Jaquan keeps playing this way, and granted, look, pads have to come on, he's still going up and getting hands on the hips, knocking footballs away. And he's been making plays in the football. He's been trying to knock passes away. You can only do so much, right? You're not going to see the tackling aspect in OTAs because you can't do it. It's not allowed. I've liked what I've seen from him, and suddenly he's emerged as a little bit of a favorite opposite of PS2 here. Those other guys like Damari Mathis, Riley Moss, and Levi Wallace, those guys are in the mix here. But if there's an emphasis on positional versatility, and it seems like Jim Leonhard might value Jaquan on the outside a little bit more, that suddenly makes things interesting because you're going to factor in competition on the outside with Jaquan there. You're going to have these other guys competing there. But you're also going to have Jaquan and the same list of other guys competing to get reps inside the slot, which if that is the reality of the situation, or if you want to put PS2 in certain situations inside the slot, put one of these other guys on the outside, Sayre, we might see a different look here from the Broncos secondary at the cornerback position than we've seen in years, which has me a little excited. You have some question marks and some unprovenness, but I think the level of excitement potential is there.
Let Jim Leonhard cook, right? I mean, the pass game coordinator, he's got to be able to utilize the matchups however he wants to do it. And so I'm with it. And just off the top of my head, Cody, I mean, I think back to some of his defensive back rooms at Wisconsin. Not that it was necessarily intentional to have smaller guys on the outside, but I kind of feel like I remember Wisconsin generally having smaller outside corners. Not to say that Jim Leonhard is like saying, hey, you have to be 5'10" or shorter to play outside corner for me. I'm not saying that, but I kind of generally think that he's proven in his scheme and what he likes to do defensively over time that if you're small, you can still play outside. You're not going to be limited to the nickel or to the slot, which is where I think a lot of times, hey, you're 5'10" or shorter, you're going to have to play slot if you want to make it in the NFL. I mean, we saw Chris Harris Jr. float around. I know he's a little bit bigger of a guy, but he could float between playing the slot, playing outside, and the Broncos needed him to do that when the defense was, transitioning players and personnel back there. So I think that is something that you mentioned early in the offseason. That was kind of like, okay, yeah, let's kind of see where that goes. If that ends up being the case where Jaquan plays more outside, the personnel groupings in the secondary could get very interesting very quickly.
I'm excited to see how it all plays out. I mean, this is what the offseason is for. Look, and Broncos Country, one thing we're going to guarantee you, we're going to observe things that we see. We're going to analyze how things are going, what's coming out of, obviously, these practices, and we're going to maybe project what it could be and maybe the other side of it as well. You're never going to get like all this crazy over-the-top overreaction. Like, that's just not how we operate here on the show. But I think there is, if you're a Broncos fan, there is a lot to be excited about right now. And look, we're not even going to dive into the optics of how many games this team's going to win this season. I think when you look at where the Broncos are at in terms of their youth, Sean Payton even told us this last Thursday as well. He says, you see the youth, you see the energy, and he says it's contagious. Like, that's something he's really excited about. And Sean seems to be in a better mood these days, which is great. I mean, it's great for us. We got like a 25-minute press conference from him when we usually get 7. So Denver right now, I think the vibes right now, they're in a better spot right now. Can they continue to build momentum? That's what you want to see going into training camp. You want to see guys stay healthy. You want to see guys compete. You want to see this play out through the NFL preseason so you can make your best informed decision on what that 53-man roster is going to look like. And then it's smooth sailing into the regular season. And we're going to be here every step of the way. Broncos Country. But with that said, that will wrap up today's episode of the show. Appreciate you so much for tuning in, rocking with us, making us your first listen of the day. For all you everydayers out there in Broncos Country, you want to know what we're going to talk about on tomorrow's episode of the show? We're going to look at each of the three quarterbacks, Bo Nix, Jarrett Stidham, Zach Wilson, and we're going to do a little bit of a what do they need to do this week in week 3 of Broncos OTAs that maybe they did something well of in week 2 or that they didn't do well enough. You want to see a little bit more. We're going to break down every quarterback here on tomorrow's brand new episode, Locked On Broncos.